Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to B-Sides. I'd like to remind you all that there are t-shirts on sale. All the proceeds go to a charity of your choice, so this is great. Also, there's a raffle that's going to end tomorrow at 12:30. Make sure to go and see the sponsors, and thanks to the sponsors to enable us to do this. I'd like... help me welcome Rob and Jared.
All right. Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. Real quickly before we get started, how many of you are spending $600 million this year on security? Lots of hands. All right, cool. No, this talk is not for people that are spending $600 million this year on security. In fact, it's not for people that are even spending $600,000, maybe not even $6,000 on security. Right? We're talking about day one when you get your security program started. You might not even have received funding for your startup yet. You just want to get that security program off the ground. I'm Jared Casner. I run engineering at C-Note.
I'm Rob Shaw, and I'm a principal engineer.
C-Note is an impact investing platform where you can invest in women and minority-run businesses, low-income housing, and community development initiatives across the US. We are a fintech. We do care about security. We care about privacy. We're dealing with money. We're dealing with a lot of PII. So we had to start up that security program on day one. Even before we had funding, we had to have some way of protecting our customers, protecting our data, and protecting your money. So today we're going to talk about security tools and ideas for a big impact with a small budget. Right? We did ask that they hand out popcorn on the way in so you guys could throw it at us. It looks like that didn't happen, so that's going to make this a lot more pleasant for us. So thank you for whoever didn't pass out the popcorn. Some caveats here. We're going to talk about a lot of tools today that these are things that we used several years ago when we first got started. That does not mean, A, that we are still using them, although in many cases we are. It also does not mean that they are the only tools available, right? We're going to talk just about what we used and the ideas that have worked for us. Really as a means of springboarding a conversation so that we can get things out in the open and talk about things that worked, and ideally continue that conversation afterwards with everybody here about things that have worked for you, so we can help other people as they start their companies move forward. And with that.
Thanks, Jared. So as a software startup, it's easy to focus solely on security within the engineering part of your organization. However, from day one, we really believe that the rest of the organization should also be focused on security. As engineers, security happens to be a byproduct of doing our work, but the things that we build are used by others within the company and our users. And without the proper policies and focus on security, it can be hard to truly protect yourself. If you think back to the opening keynote, Flea discussed that the engineering and security can feel outnumbered and outgunned. And one thing that we have done is started security from day one for everybody in our organization. And when you do that on day one, it makes it a lot easier to have it continually be done. If you try to wait till year 3 or 4, it's going to be a bit hard. So as a part of this, we have made it a priority that everyone at C-Note has an understanding of security, the areas in which their jobs could be affected, and added this as additional expectations via job descriptions. And we don't just say it's everyone's job, it is everyone's job. And just a quick caveat, related to their role, we're not going to ask a marketer to parse our DNS query logs and try to find the attacker. So real quick, before we go forward, we're pretty sure we've heard this job description idea from B-Sides before. We could not find the presentation. If any of you happen to have given it or know who gave it, please let us know. We'd love to give the proper attribution. So by putting security in the job description, it really helps us scale with our culture. Jared talks or mentioned that we're talking about it from day one, right? And so giving that opportunity for people to understand what that means, it means from our side, everyone from an engineer to a customer service representative to the CEO partakes in security practicing. And so some of the things that we do, we discuss training, which I have a pretty funny story about later. We also discuss maybe recent articles that are happening in our industry. For example, the Ring security measures and some of the articles that came out about that. And by doing that, we are educating everyone within the company. And as a byproduct, we're hoping not only are they understanding security internally and what they can do for CNOTE, but also maybe their own security at home and thinking about privacy. So I'll make a quick assumption that most people understand security from an engineering and kind of QA perspective in this room, so I'm going to jump over that. But if we were to take a quick look at marketing, let's say they're out there, they find a brand new tool that they want to use, and it's a third-party tool. They go ahead and they hook it up to your email system. You know, they put their email in it, and now it's able to read all of their emails, but it's going to make their workflows great. Then they decide, hey, you know what, let's throw that on the CEO's email as well, because that's going to really improve their job. Well, now you have a shadow IT problem. And if you add security in the job description, there's things that you can do that make them maybe not do that right away. So, you know, that's a marketing example, but that can happen in engineering as well, so I don't want to just pick on marketing. I like to peruse Reddit, Product Hunt, Hacker News. There's a lot of great tools that I just want to sign up for and play around with, but I need to be more careful about that. So, you know, we've implemented a process for those kind of things, and we're going to talk a little bit on the next slide. But I just want to leave you with the fact that by putting it in the job description, it ensures that every single member of our company does their part in understanding security. And by that, it becomes the cost of doing business. Everyone must hold each other accountable and reinforce security. And I think one more thing, we haven't had to hire a full-time security professional yet in our 3 years. We've been bootstrapped, and Jared and I have been running it from the engineering side, but by having the entire company doing it, it's made us more protected as a whole. So building on job descriptions with security being a core component, you can expect everyone to be able to discuss threats, risks as a company, and make the right decisions, hopefully. This is security by design. They are broad enough that they can be used while working on new feature development, updating an existing process in customer service, or really any other piece of work that your business faces. So here's what helped us. From day one, we adopted a very simple one-page RFC process that anybody has to fill out to get something implemented. And because it is a one-page document, we make sure that everyone does that. And yes, it seems a little anti-agile. It might seem like a little bit of extra work, but this small extra amount of planning allows us to start thinking about the solution from a higher level. Within this RFC document, we have a section focused on risks and securities that we use to define things that could go wrong, how we will handle it, finding the level of acceptable risk, and measuring whether we did well or need to rethink it the next time around. And once this document is built, and I want to preface real quick, like we really ask and time box it to less than 2 hours because we really don't want a lot of time being spent on it. We then share that with the entire company. And then anybody, from founder down to customer service, can read about it, throw in their 2 cents. It gives us a wider breadth of a potential threat. Now, we are a small team, we're less than 20 people, so you might question whether if you were 5,000, if you could send that document out to everybody. I would say yes, because at the very least, you're getting people outside of your small team or in your area to potentially be able to give you thoughts. Basically, at the end of the day, what I want to get from that is everyone should review everything if possible, because at a company, it's important to understand what's going on. And a quick anecdote that we ran into, so the marketing team decided that they wanted to add Google Tag Manager, and if you're not too familiar with that, basically script injection inside of your website. And so after that that RFC was posted, Jared and I kind of went back and showed the trade-offs, and we ended up going a different direction. And one last thing, opening up this process not only has been great for security, but it's also been able to allow us as a distributed team to have documentation. And that has been vital, especially down the line when something goes wrong or something needs to be changed. We can all go back and look at how we got here. So keeping up to date with the best security practices is challenging, even for most engineering teams. We're not Bank of America. Sounds like nobody else in here really has $600 million to spend or 12,000 employees. So since that's not an option, here's kind of what's worked for us. What we have here behind us on the slide are some of the tools that we've used that are free or have some type of freemium option, or I'm sorry, not freemium option, a paid option to be able to access the content. So PagerDuty, it publishes slide decks of security training materials, not just for the technical side, but also for the functional. And then YouTube, you can obviously get videos of past B-Sides talk, DEF CON talks, tutorials. There's a lot of great content if you're looking to make sure you're building a secure server, or if you want to teach somebody about privacy and security. And then obviously B-Sides, of course. Thanks for having us here and helping us keep our costs low. The reason we wanted to give a talk is we got to where we are today by some of the stuff that we've learned here. And with those adopted security practices from day one, we were able to educate our staff during onboarding, but we also were able to do it continually. And so, as I mentioned before, we recently were discussing as a company the ring stuff that has been recently going about and kind of explaining what we do to mitigate some of those concerns, but also to help educate everybody on the team about what they should be thinking about when they log in and create accounts on different platforms outside of our own. Lastly, I'm gonna tell a kind of slightly embarrassing story. Phish Me Free is a great tool that you can use to do phishing training in your email system. So a couple of months in, and when I joined C-Note, I saw an email that looked suspicious. I immediately thought, I'm gonna look into this and report back to Jared. As soon as I clicked it, you can probably imagine my horror when it said, this has been a test. Jared has been notified of your grave misjudgment.
But hey, you're still employed, right? So
that is true. I'm still employed for now. But it's super embarrassing, mainly because I was the only person in that round to have opened the email, and maybe the only one that's ever done that at C-Note. So, but to speak on top of phishing real quick, it is a great opportunity for those outside of the technical realm to get tested as well. And Jared's pretty cunning. He did it around the holidays, so he made sure that it was something about, hey, your package was shipped. So it was very timely as well. So there's obviously tons of content within each of the resources that we've just talked about. If you guys have suggestions that we could add to the slide to help others, please pull us aside after the talk, find us tomorrow or on Twitter. We'd love to add them because we really want to help companies that are bootstrapping their security. So to this point, we have discussed how you and your entire company can make changes to your job descriptions and think through attacks that could occur, and then improve upon that with education about security. Well, let's discuss building a little bit more of a defense in-depth security stack. There are lots of free tools out there, and here are some of them that we recommend that are free from day one and have a freemium model to help you grow. So for detecting vulnerabilities, we use Sneak, we use SonarQube. Antivirus, we have ClamAV for Linux. We use Silence on our employees' laptops. And then for development, we're using OWASP Zap to be able to manually test our responses and handling them between the browser. We also use security tools so that we're checking that everything that we return is being protected from clickjacking and cross-site scripting. And if you're a team, if you happen to know JavaScript or are working on JavaScript, I'm sure you're familiar with NPM Audit. But if you're not and you're protecting teams that are, this is a great tool to be running constantly on your code base and checking your dependencies to make sure anything that's out of date or has open vulnerabilities that have been patched, it'll let you know what those are. So one recommendation is constantly be running that, because once you get behind, especially with the way the JavaScript ecosystem is, you might have to spend a lot more time to catch up.
All right. Take over here to talk a little bit of kind of the next level of this defense in depth, right? Logging and reporting, the forensics, the ability to understand what's going on in your system. As the slide says, just do it, right? Having that central logging system is going to be a critical component. It's great to have ephemeral boxes, which is something that we designed from day one. But if you don't have that centralized logging system, you're not going to be able to do anything with those logs as soon as that box disappears, right? So choosing tools, whether it's Loggly or one of the other ones that has a freemium model or one of the more expensive ones like Splunk, having that centralized logging system is great. We actually put some redundancy into the system by also logging things to CloudWatch. Likewise, just having the logs there doesn't do you a lot of good unless you can actually report on that and understand what's going on in your system, right? So we effectively built a DIY SIM on top of Loggly in the early days to give ourselves some additional security logging and, some additional reporting tools. We pipe that into Slack, into PagerDuty. We've also got our CSP reports going into Sentry, and speaking of CSP, getting that content security policy in on day one of your organization, that will save you a huge amount of headaches later on. Probably over the last few years, I've heard many talks at B-Sides from people saying how difficult it is to implement a content security policy after the fact. You started on day one, much easier. But again, unless you're reporting on that through something like Sentry or Report URI that was on the last slide, you're not really doing yourselves any good. So having that reporting feedback loop is critical. And that feedback loop also goes into things like DMARC, right? It's, again, more than just the application security. How do you make sure that your customers are protected and that they're not getting spoofed emails allegedly from your organization? Putting DMARC into place again on day one, making sure that as you add those additional third-party email providers, whether it's Zendesk or anything like that, you're actually thinking about that from the very beginning and making sure that you've got that configuration set up and then reporting on it. In addition to the logging and reporting, we really need to have some forensic tools, right? So first thing I did when I joined C-Note, called a buddy of mine who, one of my fraternity brothers happens to be in the cyber task force at the FBI, and I said, hey Dave, how do I stop myself from getting hacked? And he laughed, because as we all know in cybersecurity, there's the adage that you've either been hacked already or you haven't been hacked yet, right? So he just kind of laughed at me. And I said, okay, so let's assume I'm calling you because I have been hacked. And he said, okay, great. The first thing I'm going to ask you for are your DNS query logs. So I immediately jumped onto my box and looked for my DNS query logs, and lo and behold, there were none. So I wrote a very simple DNS query logger. It's just a simple wrapper around TCP dump. It's actually available on our GitHub page. For those of you, again, getting started, if you're using something like Elastic Beanstalk, it's really easy. We've got the EB extension, so you can go ahead and get that TCP dump query logger in place right away. It's a critical piece of forensics that you're going to need to have. But then we also needed to have things like data provenance, right? We're a fintech company, so we've got regulatory reasons why we need to have data provenance. We've got just the ability to, again, from a forensic standpoint, if we ever get hacked, or when we get hacked, I should say, how do we know what data was accessed, who accessed it, when it was accessed, where it was accessed from? So we built a full data provenance in an audit log using tools like SNS and AWS Lambda, which allow us to get guaranteed deliverability. As long as you're invoking your Lambda function asynchronously, it also gives you a dead letter queue through SQS, which means not only are you getting that guaranteed deliverability, but you're also getting effectively built-in error handling, because you can then, in the early days before you have a chance to automate that error handling, at least you're getting notified and the ability to go and take action on that automatically. It's a very simple way of building out that audit logging from day one. So let's talk about some other tools, right? Again, if you're playing in the AWS ecosystem, there are some excellent tools through the AWS Marketplace. Trend Micro Deep Security as a Service was one we started using very early on. It gave us host-based IDS and IPS right from the very beginning at a very low cost. I think it's 1 cent to 6 cents an hour per server, depending on the size of the server, so super low cost. But even better than that, they provided effectively enterprise-level customer service on day one, even though we were paying 1 cent an hour for the service. And I was able to have them come in, look at my configuration, teach me how to use the system, make sure it was configured properly, even more importantly, show me how to test it and get value out of it to make sure that what was being, when it was finding things, that we were getting alerted on it properly and that we weren't getting too many false positives. Also within the AWS ecosystem, the Security Hub is relatively new, but it's a huge resource and a huge place for you to be able to get additional information. Guard Duty, for example, giving you actionable information about when your IAM tokens are being used in a different way than normal, right? So it has some level of anomaly detection built into it, which is great. But there are a ton of tools in there. If you get into Amazon Macy, it can get a little bit pricey if you're piping all of your logs into CloudWatch like we were, so we had to do some additional configuration around that to keep our costs constrained in the early days. But on the whole, Security Hub is a great place to get started that is very low cost, gives you a lot of value. Also relatively new to the AWS ecosystem is Systems Manager. If you're not familiar with that, one of the best things about that tool is you can now go completely key-free for your SSH access and have everything be driven through IAM roles and IAM permissions, where you can actually grant access to one of your developers for a very limited amount of time, just to be able to do one specific action on a box, and then more importantly, revoke that very quickly afterwards, and every keystroke that they do while they're in there is logged. So you have a complete audit trail of what they were doing. And then, again, thinking broader than just engineering and QA, having tools like Google Authenticator or other, LastPass as a freemium model from a password management standpoint, using those, getting two-factor authentication and password management, that notion built into your culture early on is a huge and critical component. And then for those of you who are starting a company, there's a good chance you're doing it out of coffee shops and co-working spaces and places that notoriously do not have great and secure Wi-Fi. So tools like Algo VPN that have a free VPN service, all you're paying for is the cost of the server, allows you to scale that pretty significantly. So now we're going to talk about some cost savings techniques. I'm going to give you two ideas that are not terribly intuitive, right? So the first one is go to RSA. And you're probably all laughing because that's a $2,500 ticket, it's super expensive. However, quick Google search will help you find that free Expo Hall pass that gets you onto the Expo Hall floor. You can often find ones that include keynote speeches, so you can actually go to the keynote talks as well. But getting onto the Expo Hall floor is going to give you access to a huge amount of vendors. Now you can see what the trends are in security. You can understand the new lingo that comes out because it changes from year over year. But you can also get to see what people are selling. And then you can go up and, Rob talked about Cylance as an antivirus solution earlier, right? Or endpoint protection earlier. That is not a free service. And in fact, if you go and talk to their salespeople, they'll tell you it's a 100 endpoint minimum. Well, we were 4 people when we first got endpoint protection. So how do we get something like that? That gets counterintuitive point number 2, which is find an MSSP. And again, we think about MSSPs oftentimes as these large organizations trying to take over your entire security program. There are a lot of specialty MSSPs, however, that focus just on reselling a single tool like Cylance that allowed us to buy 4 seats and expand that over time to our user base today, really with the idea that we're going to continue to save money and only pay for the services that we need. And then the last piece of advice here is negotiate. You'd be surprised at how many companies will talk to you when you're an early stage startup and say, oh, you're pre-seed, you're seed, great. We'd love to have you as a customer. The automated vulnerability scanning tool that we're using, we actually kind of have gotten grandfathered into a contract with them, but they're giving us something like 80% off of their rack rate just by having a simple phone call with their sales team. Right, so you'd be surprised at how much you can get out of negotiating, which is a very obvious and intuitive thing, but it's also surprising just how well that can work for you. And finally, the money shot, right? So let's talk real quickly about how you get that initial startup security. So Rob talked about job descriptions as piece number 1, which helps build that security culture in from day 1. So culture is something that happens no matter what at an organization. You can either be intentional about that culture, or you can be unintentional about that culture. But you are going to have a culture one way or the other. And so by putting security into the culture from day 1, by putting that into everybody's job description, you can go an awfully long way without hiring that first security professional and making sure that everybody is thinking about the security of your organization, the security of your customers, the security of your data, everything along the way. Understanding that threat modeling is a time-based exercise in large part, and making that part of your security culture also, and making that part of the organizational culture where everybody is doing threat modeling on every business practice that they develop, on every tool that they purchase. Understanding that threat modeling, well, if we put security into your job description, and I'm not an accountant here, so bear with me on the math here, but as far as I'm concerned, if it's part of your job, the cost is free. So all it's going to cost you is the time to do that threat modeling, and it's a critical piece. Likewise with the free tools, the implementation time is the cost, but those free tools will eventually potentially turn into freemium or paid tools. Then we get into education. Hey, $50 each for BSides, that's a great deal. Logging and reporting, call it $120 a month. IDS and IPS, again, if you're using that Trend microservice through AWS Marketplace, up to 6 cents an hour per machine. Antivirus, call it $50 a year per employee. The security hub is going to be relatively low cost. And then the servers for things like SonarQube and Algo VPN, call it $20 a month because you don't need beefy machines for those. And so really, if you assume less than 10 employees and less than 10 machines, that first year startup cost is less than $5,000 for your security program. And with that, I think we are right on time, so may or may not have time for questions, but this is how to get a hold of us. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you out in the hallway afterwards if you do have questions, or feel free to tweet at us, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Thanks so much.